Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Chalice. We are Chalice Unitarian Universalist congregation. We are a community of diverse beliefs and experiences, nurturing the liberal religious spirit and united by our desire to grow in love and in service. Some of us are worshiping here in person today, and some of us are worshiping on Zoom. Wherever you are, whoever you are, whomever you love, or whatever your life's journey, you are welcome here. Whether you gather with us every Sunday, once or twice a year, or are with us this morning for the first time, we are glad you are here. I'm Julia Fogel, the worship associate today, and I will be assisted by Alice Dodd. Our worship musician this morning is Justin Gray, and our song leader is Jeff Hayes. Our tech team is Sarah Comic and Dean Gadet, and I see David Ogwin back there too this morning. And our online chat host is Paula Gonzalez. This morning, we welcome to our pulpit the Reverend Lucy Bunch. Reverend Bunch attended Star King School for the Ministry and was a classmate of our own Sharon Wiley. She is starting her 10th year as the minister of the UU Society of Sacramento and is delighted to be returning to us again this morning. We are so grateful that you could be here with us, Reverend Bunch.
Great to be here, thank you.
And hope that you will enjoy your visit. You may notice that Reverend Bunch and I will be leading worship without our masks because we have passed our COVID rapid tests. For those of us here in the chapel, you will also notice that we have the windows open. This is to ensure good air circulation. There are also 4 air purifiers in the room. Please feel free to leave the chapel at any time if you are uncomfortable for any reason. You'll be able to hear what is happening in the chapel while you are outside in the courtyard. For those of you using Zoom, please notice the chat button on your Zoom menu. You are welcome to use the chat box during the service. Just be sure to open that little blue menu so that everyone can see what's being shared. I want to especially welcome those of you who are newcomers at Chalice this morning. For online newcomers, towards the end of the service, there will be a link in the online chat box for adding your name to our email list. In-person newcomers have already provided your email when you signed in. Our weekly email is the best way to get information about the many groups and activities that we offer here at Chalice. Now, let's take a breath together.
A land acknowledgement is an honest and historically accurate way to recognize the traditional First Nations of a place. It commemorates Indigenous peoples' principal kinship to the land and the fact that they have not been and cannot be erased from their collective First Mother, the land. It is a starting place to change how the land is seen and talked about, according to Wanda Nannybush of the Anishinaabe Nation in Ontario. For non-Indigenous communities, a land acknowledgement is a powerful way of showing respect and honor for the Indigenous people of the land on which we work and live. It is a way of resisting the erasure of Indigenous histories and working towards honoring and inviting the truth. It is a stepping stone to honoring broken treaty relationships. It is an act of reconciliation. Land acknowledgements are not about placing blame, nor are they intended to restore white comfort. They are prayerful, they are personal, with carefully chosen and accurate language. In honoring Indigenous peoples, we strive to learn the pronunciation of their names. Land acknowledgements recognize how systemic and institutional systems of power have oppressed Indigenous people, and how that oppression has historically influenced the way non-Indigenous peoples perceive and interact with them, in the past as well as in the present. And so, I offer this land acknowledgement. I acknowledge that I live, work, and raise my family on stolen land, the ancestral homeland of the Piamkouicham and the Kumeyaay nations, a people who have been living, working, and raising families on this land of their ancestors for countless generations. People who have an enduring connection to this land that can never be erased. People for whom their deep relationship with this land of their ancestors is inseparable from who they are. People who consider this land and everything around them to be part of their enduring family.
Now we light our chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. I'd like to invite Ralph Peters to light our chalice this morning. Our chalice lighting words are by Deborah Burrell. Fire consumes and casts a bright light. May our chalice flame consume our regrets for the past, our fears about the future, and our worries about today. May it light for us a path of joy and peace.
Good morning. It's wonderful being with you this morning. Our call to worship is from that famous author, Anonymous. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know that once again, we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other.
Please rise and body your spirit to join in singing.
Our Sunday worship is the shared spiritual practice of our community, and we tend to the congregation during this time by sharing and honoring our joys and sorrows. Here in the chapel, you are welcome to write your joy or sorrow onto a candle card, which will be collected from you. Online, please write your joy or sorrow, including your name, into the chat box. These joys and sorrows will be spoken out loud, and then we will remove this part of the service from the recording that goes onto our YouTube channel. So this sharing won't be publicly available online. We will have a few minutes of music so you can write down what you would like to share. final candle for all the joys and sorrows that go unshared and unspoken this morning. These too are held in the love and support of this community.
The topic of our service today is the ideas and works of Octavia Butler. And we have two readings to share with you. They're actually segments of the same article. I'm going to do the reading, and then after the offertory, Julia will share the second one. Octavia Butler was an author of moving and prophetic science fiction novels. She won the Hugo Award, the Nebula Award, and in 1995 became the first science fiction writer to be awarded a MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant. Her novel, The Parable of the Sower, written in 1993, is currently on the New York Times bestseller list. This dark, apocalyptic novel, written almost 30 years ago, offers important commentary on our world today. The following readings come from an essay she wrote in the year 2000 for Essence magazine. She teaches us 3 lessons that we must learn in order to secure a positive future. I will read the first lesson, and Julia will read the second and third. The first lesson is to learn from the past. Butler says, of course, writing novels about the future doesn't give me any special ability to foretell the future, but it does encourage me to use our past and present behaviors as guides to the kind of world we seem to be creating. The past, for example, is filled with repeating cycles of strength and weakness, wisdom and stupidity, empire and ashes. To study history is to study humanity. And to try to foretell the future without studying history is like trying to learn to read without bothering to learn the alphabet. When I was preparing to write The Parable of the Talents, I needed to think about how a country might slide into fascism, something that America does in The Talents. So I reread The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich and other books on Nazi Germany. I was less interested in the fighting of World War II than in the pre-war story of how Germans changed as it suffered social and economic problems, and how Hitler and others bludgeoned and seduced. And the Germans responded to this in their own history, as Hitler used that history to manipulate them. I wanted to understand the lies that people have to tell themselves when they either quietly or joyfully watch their neighbors mined, spirited away, or killed. Different versions of this horror have happened again and again in history. And they're still happening in places like Rwanda, Bosnia, Kosovo, and East Timor, wherever one group of people permits its leaders to convince them that for their own protection, for the safety of their families and the security of their country, they must get their enemies, those aliens who until now were their neighbors. It's easy enough to spot this horror when it happens elsewhere in the world or elsewhere in time. But if we are to spot it at home, to spot it before it can grow and do its worst, we must pay more attention to history. This came home to me a few years ago when I lived across the street from a 15-year-old girl whose grandfather asked me to help her with her homework. The girl was doing a report on a man who had fled Europe during the 1930s because of some people called. She hesitated and then pronounced a word that was clearly unfamiliar to her. The Nazis? It took me a moment to realize that she meant the Nazis and that she knew absolutely nothing about them. We forget history at our own peril.
The Sunday offering is an expression of the generosity that makes our congregational life possible. As Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron writes, generosity is an activity that loosens us up. By offering whatever we can, $1, a flower, a word of encouragement, we are training in letting go. Please text your donation to Chalice. If you haven't texted a donation before, know that once you text the amount, you'll get a reply with a link to follow to enter your credit card information. If you have already entered this information previously when you've donated, you won't need to enter it again. If your Sunday donation is meant to be part of your pledge payment, please be sure to indicate pledge after the dollar amount. The phone number for text donations will be on the screen in a moment. Please give generously. Please join in dedicating our offering with words of affirmation. At Chalice Congregation, our mission is to connect through worship, music, learning, and caring ministries. Here are two more ideas from Octavia Butler from her 2002 essay. The first is, respect the law of consequences. Just recently, I complained to my doctor that the medicine he prescribed had a very annoying side effect. I can give you something to counteract that, my doctor said. A medicine to counteract the effects of another medicine, I asked. He nodded. It will be more comfortable for you. I began to backpedal. I hate to take medicine. The problem isn't that bad, I said. I can deal with it. You don't have to worry, my doctor said. This second medication works and there are no side effects. That stopped me. It made me absolutely certain that I didn't want the second medication. I realized that I didn't believe there were any that had no side effects. In fact, I don't believe that we can do anything at all without side effects, also known as unintended consequences. Those consequences may be beneficial or harmful. They may be too slight to matter, or they may be worth the risk because the potential benefits are great, but the consequences are always there. The second idea is count on surprises. I was speaking to a group of college students not long ago, and I mentioned the fear we'd once had of nuclear war with the Soviet Union. The kids I was talking to were born around 1980, and one of them spoke up to say that she had never worried about nuclear war. She had never believed that such a thing could possibly happen. She thought the whole idea was nonsense. She could not imagine that during the Cold War days of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, no one would have dared to predict a peaceful resolution in the 90s. I remembered air raid drills when I was in elementary school, how we knelt, heads down against corridor walls with our bare hands, supposedly protecting our bare necks, hoping that if nuclear war ever happened, Los Angeles would be spared. But the threat of nuclear war is gone, at least for the present, because, to our surprise, our main rival, the Soviet Union, dissolved itself. No matter how hard we try to foresee the future, there are always these surprises. The only safe prediction is that there always will be surprises. So why try to predict the future at all if it's so difficult, so nearly impossible? Because making predictions is one way to give warning when we see ourselves drifting in dangerous directions. Because prediction is a useful way of pointing out safer, wiser courses. Because most of all, our tomorrow is the child of our today. Through thought and deed, we exert a great deal of influence over this child, even though we can't control it absolutely. Best to think about it, though. Best to try to shape it into something good. Best to do that for any child.
In that same Essence article from 2000, Octavia Butler tells this story. So do you really believe that in the future we're going to have the kind of trouble you write about in your books? A student asked me as I was signing books after a talk. The young man was referring to the troubles I described in The Parable of the Sower and The Parable of the Talents, novels that take place in a near future of increasing drug addiction and illiteracy, marked by the popularity of prisons and the unpopularity of public schools, the vast and growing gap between the rich and everyone else, and the whole nasty family of problems brought on by global warming. I didn't make up the problems, I pointed out. All I did was look around at the problems we're neglecting now and give them about 30 years to grow into a full-fledged disaster. Okay, the young man challenged. What's the answer? There isn't one, I told him. No answer? You mean we're just doomed? He smiled as though this might be a joke. No, I said, I mean there's no single answer that will solve all of our future problems. There's no magic bullet. Instead, there are thousands of answers, at least. You can be one of them if you choose to be. Octavia Butler chose to be one of the answers to our future problems by helping us see through her novels the inevitable results of our inaction. Born in Southern California, she was raised by a widowed mother who cleaned houses for a living. Shy and bullied as a child, Octavia spent a lot of time reading at the Pasadena Library and became interested in science fiction at a young age. At the age of 10, Butler begged her mother to buy her a Remington typewriter on which she pecked stories two-fingered. At age 12, she watched the telefilm Devil Girl from Mars and concluded that she could write a better story. And she did. She had a gift for envisioning the future and setting down her intentions of what the future could look like. This is evident not only in her books, but in her personal life as well. Throughout her life, Butler kept a notebook to write down her ideas, and on the inside of one of her notebooks is the list of intentions that she made early in her career. The first on the list, I will be a best-selling author. This came to pass after her death, when The Parable of the Sower made the New York Times bestseller list in 2020, 14 years after she died. But on the inside cover of her notebook, there were also intentions for others. I will send a poor Black youngster to Clarion or another writer's workshop. Clarion was a workshop that helped launch her career. I will help poor Black youngsters broaden their horizons. I will help poor Black youngsters go to college. As once a poor Black youngster herself, she understood that living into your dreams required support and encouragement from those who have the power to help you. And she understood that investing in youth was helping to create a positive future. So you heard in the readings her thoughts about predicting the future. All this wisdom poured into her books, particularly the trilogy, The Parable of the Sower, Parable of the Talents, and a third book of this series, The Parable of the Trickster, which was outlined but never written. This series was inspired by what she heard on the news. These books, called the Earthseed Trilogy, written in 1993 and 1996, are dark, despairing, violent, and prescient. They depict a future apocalypse in, brace yourselves everyone, 2024, when the U.S. is in chaos and hitting bottom. Butler does not envision an apocalypse from a huge disaster, but rather from an accumulation of challenges that are left untended. Climate change, economic inequality, corporate greed, fascist leadership. You get the picture. Here is a quote from one of the narrators in the second book of the series, The Parable of the Talents. He is writing from a time after this period of chaos, which they called the Pax, which was shorthand for the apocalypse. I have read that the Pax was caused by accidentally coinciding climactic, economic, and sociological crises. But it would be more honest to say that the Pax was caused by our own refusal to deal with obvious problems in these areas. We caused the problems, and then we sat and watched until they grew into a crisis. The United States of America suffered a major non-military defeat. It lost no important war, yet it did not survive the Pax. Perhaps it simply lost sight of what it once intended to be, then blundered aimlessly until it exhausted itself. Ouch. Hard to hear. But despite their despair, these books provide beacons of hope, hope that springs from an empowering theology expressed by the main character, a young woman named Lauren Oya Olamina. Lauren lives a life of despair, but dreams of creating a better future for herself and for the next generation. And in her striving, she creates a new religion called Earthseed. In the reading that Julia shared, Butler talked about the law of consequences, that everything we do has consequences, good and bad, that everything we do has impact. As UUs, we know this idea is consistent with our seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence. But it's got a little more oomph to it than our principle does, and more active and engaged. In an interdependent web of all existence, what you do has implications for others, has impact on others, as well as on yourself. Butler uses these ideas of consequences and interconnection in framing the religion that Lauren creates. And as expressed in the character's journal entries, one of the most powerful lines describing the religion goes like this: all that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. How would you imagine living your life if this were your theology? If you carried with you both the awareness of the consequences of your actions on yourself and on others? What would you do differently? How would you be different? The Earthseed stories are incredibly popular right now. As I mentioned, they're on the bestseller list more than 20 years after they were written. People are calling out Butler for being a visionary, for accurately naming what would come to be if we stayed on our current path. But what makes the Earthseed story more powerful is not just the accuracy of Butler's vision, but it is the transformation of her heroine as she comes into her full power and gives life to her theology, to her vision. She is a beacon of hope that offers hope to us as well. In another passage from the Earthseed trilogy, the character Lauren says, God is change, and in the end, God prevails. But God exists to be shaped. It isn't enough for us just to survive, limping along, playing business as usual while things get worse and worse. If this is the shape that we give to God, then someday we must become too weak, too poor, too hungry, too sick to defend ourselves. If God is change and we are the change agents, what shape are you giving to God? Butler would say that the shape that we give to God depends on our perspective. Are you predicting doom and despair? Are you living into that prediction as if it's already come to pass, even if you're doing so only sarcastically and cynically? Or can you envision something different, something more life-giving and sustaining? Butler says that in considering the future, we must be aware of our own perspective. She says where we stand determines what we're able to see. When we are discouraged or fearful and make a linear projection to the future, we will shape what is to come by our actions and our attitude. So if our actions have consequences, and if the future is predicated on our actions, then the way that we envision the future will affect what future comes about. In her books, Butler offers us radical hope. Here's a quote from an article by an author, Lavelle Porter, who says it just right. She says that the radical hope that Octavia Butler offers is not based on the inevitable linear progress, but on the belief that our own agency in the matter, that through our present actions with planning and persistence, we can lay the foundations for a better tomorrow. So how do we start to envision and create a different future than our current path suggests? How do we rise above all these layers of despair and pain that we're living through now? I have 2 suggestions to offer you this morning. First, you need to find someone to inspire you, someone visionary and courageous. I am delighted to have discovered Octavia Butler, and I have been incredibly inspired by her life, her choices, her vision, her commitment. And I follow one of her disciples, Adrienne Marie Brown, author of the book Emergent Strategies and other inspiring books. Those of us who are white can learn so much about shaping the future from African American and other people of color who have had to create a path of hope despite centuries of oppression. Maybe you're inspired by someone like Elon Musk, the 2021 Person of the Year in Time magazine. He's a visionary and a disruptor, challenging and imperfect. The auto industry was resistant to electric vehicles for decades, and he blew it all open. His current effort is to change the process of mining minerals needed for the batteries to make them less wasteful and more earth-honoring. Visionary and disruptor, whatever you think of him, he is charting a different future. So who is that courageous visionary that inspires you? Is it someone alive now, someone who's passed on? Desmond Tutu? Ruth Bader Ginsburg? Is it your immigrant ancestor who had the courage and vision to start a new life and create a new future for their family? Let their life and words seep into you, inspire you to envision a better future for yourself and for all of us. My number 2 piece of advice this morning is to find and use your power. To get out of this mess that we have created requires all of us to find our own power to change and shape the future. Your power, your gifts make a difference. Butler was at first uncomfortable about being so blatant about power in her novels. After many of us are adverse to the idea of using power, our political landscape has really tainted this idea because we see people using power in such terrible ways. However, Butler came to appreciate that power is a tool and should not be wielded only by those with evil intent. Your power matters. What you do with it matters. There's one positive benefit. Well, some people probably love superhero movies. I'm not one of them, but bless you if you love them. But one of the positive benefits of all those superhero movies is that people are now asking each other the question, what's your superpower? So I ask you that. What is your superpower? What is your power to make a difference? Lauren, in the parable of the sower, had the vision and the ability to inspire others to follow her, to create a new religion that gave people a time frame for living in a compassionate and sustainable manner. This is what kept her going, her community going through the worst of times. So what is your power to make a difference? Don't be shy. The world does not need shy right now. We need people who are willing to step up. Your power doesn't have to be that of a visionary. It could be that of a caretaker, a love generator, a data cruncher, a fixer of broken things, a creator of beauty. Your power could be finding hope where there seems to be none. Whatever makes you come alive is your power. Okay, so we have our inspiration. You're going to find somebody to inspire you. You're going to find your superpower and understand it. So then what? I think in previous sermons that I'd given, I would have said, go forth and change the world. But Octavia Butler has really helped me to see that before we can act, we must have a different vision for the future than our current trajectory. If you take away one point from this sermon, make it this: if our actions have consequences, and if the future is predicated on our actions, then the way that we envision the future will affect what future comes about. Every morning I do a Qigong routine that includes a form called drawing the bow to shoot an arrow. As I was taught this form, you pull the bow to shoot an arrow and you envision out as far as the eye could see. And when I started doing it, I would be incredibly fanciful. I'd say, I see Japan. I see the back of my own head. And then I started taking it a little more seriously, and I'd imagine the house next door, and maybe the house next to that, and maybe down at the end of the street. And I realized that by being serious about focusing, it really increased my focus. It gave me clear vision of where I was headed. I was kind of doing the same thing about thinking of the future of our world, sort of vague ideas, right, about beloved community, bending the arc of the universe. But we have to start envisioning a future with more intention and more focus, both as individuals and a community. If our actions have consequences, and if the future is predicated on our actions, then the way we envision the future will affect what future will come about. It is time. It is time. We don't have the luxury of sitting around and waiting and watching as the world crumbles. We must envision the world as we dream it, set our intention, and use our power to create it. As Octavia Butler said, there is no single answer that will solve all of our future problems or all of our current problems. There is no magic bullet. Instead, there are thousands of answers, at least. We can be one of them if we choose to be. So may it be. Will you pray with me? Holy Spirit of life and love, be with us this morning and in all the days to come. Help us to set our arrow with intention and focus on a healthy, life-giving future for ourselves and our world. Give us strength, Holy Spirit, and enthusiasm to live our vision. Help us to be change makers and life givers, to offer our gifts to our hurting world. We pray that we never lose sight of the power of love. May the life force flow strong through us and among us, and we pray that it carries us to a better future for all. Blessed be, and amen. And now let's sing into that future. Come and go with me. Please rise in body or spirit. Please repeat after me these words of benediction that I bring you from my home congregation in Sacramento, California. May faith in the Spirit of life, hope for the community of earth, and love of the sacred in one another be ours now and in all the days to come.
Before we close the service, I'd like to remind newcomers online to please use the link in the chat box to add your name to our email list. You are invited to close our time together by singing The Well. After our closing hymn, please return to your seats for an announcement. for the online folks, we're trying an experiment for the next few weeks. You probably already noticed that this service was run as a regular Zoom meeting rather than a webinar. So coffee hour is now in this same Zoom room. If you'd like to chat with people, just stay tuned and do not exit the Zoom meeting. There will be a brief break with some music for about 5 minutes. Then the Zoom meeting will be opened up and people can chat with each other online. So stay tuned. Don't exit. Just stay here and you'll be in coffee hour. This information is for our in-person congregants. You are invited to enjoy social hour on our courtyard, where masks are optional. Please always remember that children younger than 5 years old may not yet be vaccinated or fully vaccinated, so be careful around them. Coffee and refreshments are available on the far side of the courtyard by the hub kitchen, so please go and enjoy.